Gravity is the only law that matters on a dock, and I've been its judge and jury for 30 years. My name is Franklin Delgado. I'm 57 years old, and for the last 3 decades, my office has been a small steel box suspended 400 feet above the port of Long Beach. From there, I conducted a symphony of physics, moving pieces of the world that weighed more than a city block. The day they fired me, the air in the executive suite was cold. Not the sharp, salt-laced cold that comes off the Pacific in January, but a stale, refrigerated chill that smelled of money and weak convictions. Sterling Fairchild, all of 28 years old, did not look up when I entered. He was busy aligning the edge of a leather-bound blotter with the corner of his massive mahogany desk, an act of profound importance, apparently. He had a framed Columbia MBA on the wall, angled just so it caught the morning light. On his wrist, a gleaming Rolex Daytona. Holding up his perfectly creased Armani trousers was a thin strip of orange leather with a silver H on it. The Hermes belt probably cost more than the first engine I ever rebuilt. "Frank," he said, his voice as smooth and empty as a polished stone. He finally lifted his eyes. They were the color of a washed-out sky and held no depth. "We're making a strategic realignment of our operational assets." I stood there in my work-worn jeans and steel-toed boots, my hands clasped behind my back. My knuckles are scarred from a lifetime of dealing with stubborn machinery. His hands, resting on the desk, were immaculate. They looked like they'd never held anything heavier than a latte. "The future of this port is automation," he continued, reciting lines he'd clearly practiced in front of a mirror. "We're shifting our paradigm toward a more streamlined, digitally integrated workflow. To achieve that, we need to optimize our human capital." Optimization. I had built the heavy lift division of this port from 2 rusty cranes and a crew of 6 into the most efficient operation on the West Coast. I had mentored 24 operators, written safety protocols that became industry standards, and personally overseen lifts that made engineers from Germany and Japan shake my hand with genuine respect. And now this kid, who smelled faintly of expensive cologne and entitlement, was going to optimize me. A dead calm settled over me. It's a feeling I know well. It's the same feeling you get just before you lift a 400-ton load in a crosswind. Panic is useless. Anger is a liability. You get calm, you get clear, and you see the whole board. "Your role, in its current form, is a legacy position," he said, looking at a script on his monitor. "It doesn't align with our forward-looking automation strategy." I didn't say anything. I just watched him. I watched the slight twitch in his jaw that told me he was nervous, despite the practiced corporate monotone. He was a boy playing king, and he knew, somewhere deep down, that he was sitting on a throne he hadn't earned. "Your time here is over," he said, the finality landing with the soft thud of a manila envelope he pushed across the desk. "HR has your severance package. Security will escort you to your locker." He still hadn't really looked at me. Not at the man who had given this place 30 years. He was terminating a line item on a spreadsheet. "I understand," I said. My voice was even. That surprised him. He looked up, expecting an argument, a plea, maybe some shouting. He was prepared for a scene. He wasn't prepared for quiet acceptance. I took my keycard from my wallet and placed it on the desk next to the envelope. I added the key to the Liebherr 500-ton crane, my crane. The metal was worn smooth from 30 years in my pocket. He glanced at the key as if it were an ancient relic. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're not going to want to miss how this plays out. "The door's right there," he said, gesturing with a flick of his perfect hand. He'd already turned back to his monitor, my existence optimized out of his reality. I walked out. The security guard, a man named Hector, whose son played on the same Little League team as my grandson, looked ashamed. He didn't say a word, just walked beside me to the locker room. I cleared out my things, a spare set of gloves, a photo of my wife Maria from our wedding day, and a worn copy of a naval engineering manual. In 20 minutes, 30 years were packed into a cardboard box. As I walked to my truck, a 1995 Ford F-35 with 400,000 miles on the diesel engine, I felt the weight of that key no longer in my pocket. The rosary my mother gave me swung gently from the rearview mirror. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard certainty of a natural law about to assert itself. Here's what Sterling Fairchild, with his fresh MBA and his father on the board of directors, didn't know. He didn't know that gravity isn't the only unforgiving force at a port. There's also the federal government. And in my wallet, behind my driver's license, was a laminated card that was about to become the most expensive piece of paper in his short, gilded life. 2 days before the humiliation, I was in the cab of Big Blue, the 500-ton Liebherr mobile crane. It was my kingdom. 400 feet up, the noise of the port faded into a distant hum. You could see all the way to Catalina Island. The air was clean up there. You were above the diesel fumes and the shouting. You were alone with the sky, the steel, and the load. The job that day was a delicate one. A set of massive, custom-built turbines for a new power plant in Arizona. Each one was worth about $8 million and was balanced with the precision of a Swiss watch. One hard knock, one clumsy set-down, and it was a multi-million-dollar piece of scrap metal. The insurance paperwork alone was thicker than a phone book. My hands moved over the controls, a pair of joysticks, and a bank of switches. After 30 years, they were extensions of my own body. I didn't think, I just did. I felt the slight shift in the wind coming off the water. I accounted for the minute stretch in the steel cables as the load took hold. I nudged the boom a quarter of an inch to the left, aligning the turbine perfectly with the waiting transport cradle. It was a dance of immense forces, and I was the choreographer. Down below, men the size of ants scurried around. They trusted me. They worked under loads that could obliterate them in a fraction of a second, and they did it without fear because they knew Frank Delgado was in the box. I had never dropped a load, not once, in 30 years. That is a record that doesn't exist on a spreadsheet. It exists in the bones of the men on the ground. Back in 1993, when I started here, this port was a different world. It was rougher. The equipment was old, loud, and leaked oil. The bosses were men who had come up from the docks themselves. Men with names like Gus and Sal, who had grease under their fingernails and could splice a steel cable with their eyes closed. My first mentor was a man named Pops Callahan. He was a wiry Irishman who had been operating cranes since the 1960s. He taught me that the machine talks to you. You just have to learn its language. You feel it in the vibrations through the seat. You hear it in the pitch of the hydraulics. He taught me to respect the load, always. The moment you stop fearing it, Frankie, he'd say, is the moment it kills you. Before that, I spent 12 years in the Navy. I was a Seabee. We built and fought. I learned how to work with heavy equipment in the worst conditions imaginable, from the jungles of the Philippines to the deserts of the Middle East. The Navy taught me discipline. It taught me that procedure is written in blood. You follow the checklist, you respect the chain of command, and you never ever assume. It was a good foundation for a life spent managing catastrophic forces. The breaking point came in 2010, or rather, the opportunity. A new federal regulation, Title 10, Part 71 of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission Code, came down. It mandated a new, hyper-stringent certification for any personnel involved in the critical lift and transport of fissile material containers and reactor components. A power company was planning to decommission the San Onofre nuclear plant and needed a port capable of handling the reactor pressure vessel. It was a single lift, but it was the most critical and most lucrative lift in the history of the port. The contract was worth a fortune, but it required an NRC heavy lift operator nuclear certification. The company held a meeting. They needed a volunteer. Nobody wanted it. The training was a 6-month ordeal in the Nevada desert. The background checks were invasive. The exams were brutal. The personal liability was immense. If you messed up, you didn't just cause an accident. You caused an international incident. The room was silent. I raised my hand. Pops Callahan had always told me, be the one man they can't replace. I went to Nevada. For 6 months, I lived in a trailer and studied physics, metallurgy, and radiological safety. I spent hundreds of hours in simulators, practicing failure scenarios that would turn a normal man's hair white. I lifted mock reactor vessels in controlled high wind, earthquake, and equipment failure simulations. I was grilled by men from the NRC with cold eyes and no sense of humor. In the end, I was one of only 3 men who passed the final exam. The other 2 were back east. West of the Mississippi River, I was the only one. They gave me a laminated card with my photo, a federal seal, and a long certification number. NRC-HLON-71H-001. I was the first. I came back to the port. The reactor vessel lift went perfectly. The company got a massive bonus. My boss gave me a $1,000 check and a plaque. But the real prize was the certification, which I renewed every 2 years on my own time and my own dime. It was my ace in the hole. An asset that was invisible until the one day it was the only thing that mattered. 11 months ago, Sterling Fairchild arrived. An email from corporate headquarters announced him as the new Vice President of West Coast Operations. Nepotism was the unspoken part of his title. His father was a major shareholder who sat on the company's board. Sterling was his father's solution to what he called an outdated union culture. His first all-hands meeting was a masterclass in condescension. He stood before 150 longshoremen, operators, and mechanics, men with decades of experience, and talked to us like we were children. He used a PowerPoint presentation filled with charts that went up and to the right, and words like synergy, disruption, and digital transformation. He looked at us, the men who made the port run, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He didn't see experience. He saw legacy costs. He didn't see skill. He saw inefficiencies. He saw a line of old, stubborn men who needed to be replaced by an app. That day, I knew my time was limited. Men like Sterling don't build. They just break things to see if they can put them back together in a shinier, cheaper shape. The day he fired me, I drove my old Ford home, the rumble of the 7.3-liter Power Stroke diesel a familiar comfort. The rosary swayed back and forth. I didn't go straight home. I drove up to Signal Hill and parked, looking down at the port spread out below me. It looked like a giant circuit board, a complex web of ships, cranes, and trucks, all moving in a coordinated, relentless rhythm. My rhythm. I had helped set that tempo for 30 years. From up here, I could see Big Blue, my crane, standing idle. A silent giant. There was no panic, no knot in my stomach. The feeling was cold and clear, like a pane of glass. A switch had been flipped inside me. The part of me that felt loyalty. The part that would come in during a strike to keep critical goods moving. The part that would work a 36-hour shift during a storm. That part was gone. It had been optimized. I went home. Maria was in the garden, tending to her roses. She saw the box in my hand and the look on my face. She's known me for 40 years. She doesn't need words. "What is it, Frank?" she asked, pulling off her gloves. "They gave me some time off," I told her. It wasn't a lie. It was just an incomplete truth. "New boss, young kid, wants to shake things up." She nodded slowly, her eyes searching mine. "The quinceañera is in 3 weeks. Sophia would be so happy if you were there for the whole thing, not just showing up late, covered in grease. I'll be there, I said. The first week, I did nothing. I disconnected my phone. I fixed the loose board on the back porch. I tuned up the engine on my F350. I drank coffee on the porch and watched the world go by. It was the first time in 30 years I hadn't woken up at 4 a.m. to the tide schedule and the shipping news. The silence was deafening at first, then peaceful. Meanwhile, I knew what was happening at the port. Sterling Fairchild was celebrating his first victory. He would have sent a company-wide email full of his usual buzzwords, announcing the successful realignment of the heavy lift division. He was probably having celebratory drinks at the Ritz-Carlton downtown with other men in expensive suits. He posted my job online. Crane operator. The description was generic, copied and pasted by some HR drone who didn't know the difference between a Liebherr and a Caterpillar. It listed 5+ years of experience as a requirement. It was like asking for a heart surgeon with 5+ years of experience holding a sharp knife. What he didn't do was read my personnel file. He probably saw the file cabinet full of thick folders on men who had been there for decades and dismissed it as legacy paperwork. If he had opened mine, he would have seen the commendations, the safety awards, and the thick section at the back, stapled together, with copies of my NRC certification renewals going back over a decade. But that was boring. That was details. Men like Sterling are about the big picture. They don't realize the big picture is held together by a million tiny, boring details. On the 8th day, the first call came. It was a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Jimmy, the union steward. "Frank, it's a mess down here." His voice was strained. "They hired some kid from the Port of Oakland. He's got maybe 5 years on a mid-size rig. They put him in Big Blue this morning. He damn near put a container through the side of a Maersk ship. He's scared of it, Frank. The machine knows. You always said the machine knows." I deleted the message. 2 weeks after my firing, the real problems started. A priority shipment of massive Caterpillar 797F mining truck frames arrived. They were headed for a copper mine in Utah, a client that represented about $16.8 million in annual revenue for the port. It was a tandem lift, requiring 2 cranes working in perfect synchronization to lift the awkward 150-ton frames off the ship. I had choreographed that exact lift a dozen times. The new kid couldn't do it. He and the other operator weren't in sync. They almost had the first frame swinging. The foreman, a good man named Al, made the call to stop before someone got killed. The shipment was stuck on the vessel. Sterling's solution was a conference call. He got the client, the shipping agent, and the port supervisors on a Zoom meeting. I heard about it later from Al. Sterling talked about reevaluating our synergistic processes and leveraging new operational paradigms. The client, a gruff old man who ran the mining operation, cut him off. "Son, I don't care about your paradigms. I have a billion-dollar hole in the ground in Utah that is sitting idle because I don't have my trucks. My contract says you will offload my equipment. It does not say you will hold a seminar about it. Get it off the ship. Now." Sterling, flustered, promised immediate action. His immediate action was to try and hire a third-party lift crew at triple the cost. They took one look at the job and the crane and said they wouldn't touch it without the original operator who knew the machine. The Caterpillar frames sat on the ship, racking up demurrage fees of $90,000 a day, payable by the port. Sterling's optimization had just cost the company $500,000 in a week. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago. That's when the official manifest for the MV Isar landed on the desks at the Port Authority. The Isar was a special heavy lift vessel out of Hamburg. Its cargo was a single, massive object, a 480-ton reactor pressure vessel for the Diablo Canyon power plant refurbishment project. My phone rang. This time, it wasn't a blocked number. It was Dave Miller, the senior project manager for special cargo. I had worked with Dave for almost 20 years. He was one of the good ones. "Frank," he said, without any preamble, "you see the schedule?" "What schedule, Dave?" "I'm retired." "I fish now," I said, looking out at my perfectly manicured lawn. There was a long pause. "Frank, the Izar is due on Pier T 140 in 10 days. It's the Diablo Canyon vessel." He didn't need to say more. He knew. Dave was a details man. He knew about the contracts. He knew about the regulations. He knew about the little laminated card in my wallet. "That's a shame," I said calmly. "Sounds like a big job. Hope you've got the right guy for it." "Frank, please," he said, his voice dropping. "You know there is no other guy. We've checked. The company has checked. You're it. The only one." "Then it sounds like the company has a problem," I said. "Tell your boss, Dave, the MBA kid. Tell him to optimize his way out of this one." "He knows," Dave said quietly. "He found out this morning. I've never seen a man that color before." "I'm retired, Dave," I repeated, and I gently ended the call. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Sterling Fairchild, for the first time in his life, was confronted with a problem he couldn't solve with a buzzword or a call to his father. He had run up against the hard, unyielding wall of federal regulation. He had his people call the NRC. They confirmed it. No certificate, no lift. The fines for attempting to bypass the regulation started at $10 million and a permanent blacklisting of the port for all nuclear-related transport. He called the power company. They informed him that under the terms of their contract, for every day the reactor vessel was delayed past the delivery date, the port was liable for liquidated damages of $1,200,000 per day. The vessel was due in 10 days. The clock was ticking. He called the shipping line. They informed him that the MV Isar was a specialized vessel that cost $200,000 a day to operate. If it was tied up at the dock, unable to offload its cargo, the port was responsible for that cost. Sterling Fairchild, in his attempt to save the company my $65,000 a year salary, had created a situation that was about to cost them millions, potentially tens of millions of dollars. His career was on a countdown to self-destruction. The day of the quinceañera arrived. It was a beautiful, sunny California day. My niece, Sophia, looked like a princess in her dress. The party was in full swing in my brother's backyard. The sound of mariachi music filled the air. The smell of carnitas and grilled corn was everywhere. I was surrounded by family. My brothers, my cousins, my kids, and my grandkids. Men I had grown up with. Men who worked with their hands. Plumbers, mechanics, contractors. They didn't talk about synergy. They talked about their kids, about the Dodgers, about the price of lumber. It was real. I was wearing a white guayabera, relaxed, a paper plate piled high with food in one hand, and a cold beer in the other. Maria was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in months. I was completely present. The port, the crane, Sterling Fairchild, they felt a million miles away. My phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a New York area code, the home office. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. My brother looked at me. "Someone's desperate to talk to you, Hermano." I walked to a quiet corner of the yard, near the rose bushes. I answered, "Is this Frank Delgado?" The voice was deep, authoritative. It was not Sterling Fairchild. "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Henderson. I'm the Executive Vice President of North American Operations for the company." He was Sterling's boss's boss, the real power. "I'm at a party," I said. "Mr. Delgado," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have a situation here, a very serious one." I took a bite of carnitas. I let him talk. He laid it all out. The reactor vessel, the NRC regulations, the fines, the contractual penalties. He didn't make excuses or try to shift blame. He just stated the facts of the disaster that his star MBA had created. It was a long list. Mr. Fairchild has been reassigned, Henderson said carefully. His strategy was ill-conceived. It was stupid, I said, cutting through the corporate euphemism. He was a fool, and you let him run the show. There was a pause. Yes, Henderson said, the single word costing him a great deal. We made a mistake, a significant one, and we need you to help us correct it. Help you? I said. A month ago, your company informed me that my services were a legacy cost you no longer required. I was optimized. I believe the door was right there. I was quoting Sterling's parting words back to the man who had hired him. Frank, Mr. Delgado, Henderson stammered, his composure cracking. We understand your position. We are prepared to make it right. We will reinstate you immediately. We will double your previous salary. I laughed, a short, dry bark. Double my salary? Mr. Henderson, you're bleeding about $1.5 million a day in penalties starting next week. You're not in a position to offer me a raise. You're in a position to beg, but I don't want you to beg. I took another sip of my beer. The mariachi band started playing a lively tune. The power had shifted completely. It was no longer in a boardroom in New York. It was here, in a backyard in Long Beach, in the hand of a man holding a paper plate. I'll think about it, I said. Think about it? He almost shouted. The ship will be here in 4 days. My thinking has a price, I said, my voice dropping into that dead calm. So I suggest you listen very carefully. Get a pen. You're going to want to write this down. I could hear him scrambling for one. First, I began, my employment is not being reinstated. We are executing a new contract. My new title will be Vice President of Heavy Lift Operations. I will have full autonomy over personnel, equipment, and safety for my division. Everything. No MBAs from Columbia will be allowed within 500 feet of my cranes without my written permission. I heard him breathing. Okay, I can make that happen. Second, the compensation, I continued. My new role comes with a signing guarantee. $3 million. Not a bonus, not stock options. $3 million wired to my personal bank account. The transfer confirmation must be on my phone before I even think about driving down to that port. There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. $3 million? That's the price for the first day, Arthur. The penalties for day 2 are much higher. Do the math. A long, agonized silence. And what else? He finally whispered. Third, I said, and this was the part for me. For every old-timer who had been disrespected, for every skilled man treated like a disposable part. I want Sterling Fairchild's letter of resignation, and I want that letter read aloud, by you, at the next all-hands safety meeting. The entire letter. Every word of his pathetic, face-saving garbage about pursuing new opportunities. I want every man on that dock to hear it. We can't do that, he said weakly. It's a personnel matter. His father... That's the price, I said firmly. That is the non-negotiable part of the deal. You created the mess in public. You will clean it up in public. Take it or leave it. I have a toast to give to my niece. I hung up the phone. The next morning, as I was drinking coffee on my porch, my phone chimed. It was a notification from my bank. A wire transfer had been received. The amount was $3 million. An hour later, a courier delivered a thick contract to my door. Everything was there, exactly as I had demanded. My new title, my autonomy. At the very back was a scanned copy of a resignation letter, signed by Sterling Fairchild. I drove my F-35O to the port. I didn't speed. I stopped for a red light. I let an old woman cross the street. When I got to the main gate, I pulled up to the security shack. My old keycard wouldn't have worked. A man in a suit I didn't recognize ran out from the administrative building. Mr. Delgado, welcome back, sir. We have your new credentials right here. He handed me a new ID badge. It read, Franklin Delgado, Vice President, Heavy Lift Operations. The all-hands safety meeting was held that afternoon on Pier J. The entire day shift was there. Mechanics, longshoremen, foremen, office staff, over 200 people. Arthur Henderson flew in from New York. He stood on the back of a flatbed truck, looking pale and tired. He held a single piece of paper in his trembling hand. As part of a strategic restructuring, he began, his voice amplified by a portable speaker, Sterling Fairchild has resigned from his position, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. His letter reads as follows. He read every word. The crew was dead silent. They listened to the hollow corporate phrases, and they understood perfectly. It wasn't a resignation. It was an execution. When Henderson finished, a quiet satisfaction settled over the crowd. It was the sound of respect being restored. The MV Isar arrived the next day. The reactor vessel sat in its cradle on the deck like a sleeping god. It was a massive, intimidating object. I didn't get in the crane. I stood on the dock with a radio. I had chosen a young operator, a kid named Marcus, who I had been training before I left, to take the controls. I talked him through it, step by step, from the ground, my ground. Easy now, son, I said into the radio. Feel the wind. Let the machine settle. Don't fight it. Dance with it. The lift was flawless. The 480-ton vessel rose into the air, swung gracefully over the dock, and was lowered onto the specialized transport vehicle with the gentleness of a feather. The entire operation took less than an hour. The enablers, the mid-level managers who had stood by and watched Sterling clean house, couldn't look me in the eye. Their silence had made them complicit, and now they had to answer to me. Some were reassigned. Some took early retirement. The culture of disrespect was over. As for Sterling, he was gone. Escorted out the same day his resignation was signed. His Armani suits and his Hermes belt were gone. His father's influence couldn't save him from a failure this public, this expensive. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms. I went home that night at 5 p.m. For the first time in 30 years, I was home for dinner on a weekday. Maria had made my favorite, chile verde. My son came over with his family. I played with my grandson on the floor. I was no longer just a provider. I was a father, a grandfather, a husband. I was present. The money was good. It paid for my grandchildren's college education, outright. It paid off my house. It bought Maria the trip to Italy she had dreamed about since we were kids. But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was the silence at that safety meeting. It was the look of relief on the faces of the men on the dock. It was the quiet authority of competence over arrogance. Some assets don't show up on a spreadsheet. Experience, loyalty, and respect are hard to quantify, but you find out their true value the moment they're gone. Control isn't in a title or an MBA. It's in the boring, forgotten details. It's in a laminated card in an old man's wallet. It's in knowing how to move the world and knowing the price to charge when they ask you to move it for them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button if you believe experience should always triumph over arrogance. Leave a comment and let me know what you would have done in my shoes. And make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another story of hard-earned justice.